Right, here we are, lazy afternoon. This is about the time, if you're homeless, you start thinking about where you're going to go to sleep. So I think today we will talk about public housing, because although I've addressed the subject a number of years ago on this YouTube presentation for public interest before corporate interests, the fact is that things haven't improved, they've got worse. Now I'm familiar with the situation in Victoria, but to different degrees the same situation has occurred across the country, both on the federal level, state level and obviously the local council level. Because in 2021, now I'm sick of saying this, we live on potentially the richest continent on the planet, 25 million people, a drop in the ocean when it comes to the number of people, and we still can't address the issue of housing insecurity. Housing insecurity. Let's not talk about homelessness, because most people never believe they'll become homeless. But housing insecurity, like job insecurity, is becoming a major issue in this country. And the main reason it's become an issue is because the state has moved away from the proposition of providing housing for its citizens and permanent residents who cannot afford to buy in the private housing market. Now currently, 1/3 of Australians own their own home, about 25% are paying a mortgage, and about 40% are paying rent. And although all the news outlets will tell you it's wonderful because housing prices are going up and up and up and up and up, the reality is these things have changed dramatically. In the 1960s, a single wage earner, that's a single wage earner in a family situation, could buy a home within 7 years of putting down a deposit. That's with an ordinary job. Not a professional, not a white collar worker, but just an ordinary job. If you're able to get the deposit together, you could own that house within 7 years, one wage earner. In 2021, two wage earners in a family situation now have to work full time in order to meet mortgage repayments, which can take up to 40 years, sometimes 50 years, in order to buy that home outright. That's the dilemma. Now, while wages growth is static and wages have not increased and will not increase for a period of time, rents have increased, housing prices have increased, and we've seen ridiculous rises in rents and housing prices over the last decade, especially over the last few years during the COVID epidemic. And this has occurred for a majority of reasons, but I don't want to look at that today. I want to look at the issue of housing security. If 700,000 children are living in poverty, over 4 million Australians are living in poverty, another 70% are paying rent or paying off their mortgage, and that's usually younger people, because at the end of your life, if you're lucky, you actually own your own home in this country, just in time to give it away to the private sector when you go into a nursing home, but that's a different story again. So why has public housing become the pariah? Why is it a 21st century pariah? Even when the Labor Party responded to the 2021 Morrison-led Liberal National Party government budget, they talked about social housing, not specifically public housing when it came to funding 20,000 extra housing units in this country, and that's nothing, that's a drop in the ocean. So what's the history of public housing? The history of public housing is very simple. When returned servicemen and women returned from World War II, many of them found themselves homeless, and they were living in the Botanical Gardens and the MCG in Melbourne. And pressure was placed on the state government because these people had made significant sacrifices by defending the country, for the state governments to embark on a program of providing public housing for people who could not buy housing in the private marketplace. This wasn't public housing for people in dire emergencies who were homeless. This wasn't public housing for people on social security benefits. This was public housing for anybody who could not access the private housing market. Today in 2021, the talk is about affordable housing, community housing, social housing. Nobody anymore uses the word public. And in Victoria specifically, we have seen a tsunami of privatisation of the public housing sector, not just by previous Liberal National Party governments, by the current Labor government, which is doing all it can to offload its responsibility to provide low-cost housing and affordable housing to the private sector, by providing guarantee for loans, by handing over leases, by handing over the management of public housing units, by actually handing over titles in many cases to private organisations. And these private organisations, whether they're for profit or not for profit, ultimately determine who uses public housing. It's very simple. So no wonder last week, when I was involved in the regular vigils we have outside the Victorian Parliament, it was about 7:30, 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night. We're holding up the banner, public housing, everybody's business. And across the road, 30 metres, maybe 40 metres maximum from the Victorian Parliament, was a homeless man sleeping on the footpath outside the Windsor. And if you go back to the city today and many regional centres, you will see homelessness has once again become a significant issue as people are turfed out of hotels as the pandemic comes under control. Now everybody says it's too difficult. It is too difficult. You cannot provide public housing. We can't afford it. Well, let's think about this. Let's think about this very closely. Why is public housing important? It's not a charity. It's important for a variety of reasons, and I'll go through those reasons, and then I'll go through a mechanism via which we can fund public housing and fund a large number of units and houses, many spot purchased. Why is public housing important? Well, if you're a tenant in a public house, whether it's an estate or a spot purchase public housing in the suburbs or regional Victoria, if you are a tenant, your rent is 25% of your income. So that $1 in 4 that you earn or receive in a social security benefit pays for your rent, pays for a roof over your head. So what does that mean? It means a lot of important things, and people forget the social security net is not just about giving people money, it's about providing public housing. That's what a social security net is all about. It's a net to capture people. Not a net that's got huge holes in it so that people fall onto the ground, but a net to capture people. So what does public housing do? Not only does it provide housing for people who need housing, who can't afford current rents and who can't afford to buy into the private marketplace, it provides stability. It gives people security. It allows them to bring up their children in a secure environment. Their children can go to the same schools. They can be part of the same sporting clubs. They can be part of the same social networks. If you're in private rental accommodation, you may have to move every few years, and you find that your children's education is disrupted, and in some cases permanently disrupted. You'll find they'll have to move from friendship group to friendship group, which makes it more difficult for them to assimilate integrate into society. That's the issue. So public housing provides security. Security for the tenant, security for any dependents the tenant may have. Not security just in terms of finances, but security in terms of security of being in the same neighbourhood, of knowing the people around you, of forming networks, of forming social networks. Secondly, what does a vibrant public housing sector do? A vibrant public sector puts downward pressure on rents. Now in Australia, the only country in the world, you can get a tax deduction for owning more than one houses and renting them out. It's a great lurk if you can do it. Great lurk. So the more people in public housing, the fewer in private rental. The decreased number of people in the private rental market, the less are rents. Rents would drop. At the same time, as rents drop, prices would fall, and as prices fall, it allows younger people to enter the property market at a lower price. But most importantly of all, if we remove the fact that it provides security to families, decreases criminal activity, increases integration, provides community backgrounds for people. But the important thing, and it also decreases rents, a strong public housing sector, and decreases prices at the lower end of the market, allowing more people to enter. The most important element is that it is good for the economy. I know that in this period of deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation, life is about being good for the economy, not being good for people. But even using their criteria, a large public housing sector is good for the economy because it allows people to spend only 25% of their social security benefits or rental costs or mortgage costs, only 25%. So the benefits are undeniable. There's no question about the benefits, and that's why I find it extraordinary that all resources, all government resources, all taxpayers' money at the federal and state level is pushed into rent relief if you rent in the private rental market by the federal government, and what that means is rents increase, or it's pushed into affordable community social housing sector, which is private housing. So these are the benefits. So how do you fund? As I said before, if you've got a weak public housing sector and a strong private housing sector, there is no competition in the marketplace. In order to have competition in a capitalist marketplace, you need a strong public sector and a strong private sector, as well as a third tier, a sector based on cooperatives and collectives, but that's another issue for another day. So today, all the cards are in the hands of the private sector. If you're playing a game of poker, they have enough cards for a royal flush. Enough cards for a royal flush. So how do you fund it? Every state government levies stamp duty on buying a home. Stamp duty is a great avenue of revenue. In the ACT, they've changed stamp duty to a continuous land tax, but in the rest of the country, it's about stamp duty revenue coming in to the state government. Now, the state government does not use stamp duty revenue to build public housing. You don't even have to build public housing. In the 80s and 90s in Victoria, there was a spot purchasing program where the state government bought public housing in various parts of Victoria, in the inner city, in the outer suburbs, in regional, in rural areas. And what that meant is that you didn't push everybody who was on a social security benefit together in a housing estate and create problems which can be difficult to solve. Public housing wasn't just the last stop before destitution. Spot purchasing meant that people could be part of that community, whether they had the money or not. to purchase or rent in that society. And there are still many homes that have been spot purchase which haven't been privatised by the state government. So getting back to stamp duty revenue. Stamp duty revenue in Victoria, and this is what I'm familiar with, can range anywhere between 5 to 7 billion. That's right, billion dollars per year. Stamp duty on houses is a tax which is levied on people for buying a home. And it can range anywhere between $20,000 up to $50,000, $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. So on top of the price, you have to pay stamp duty. And if you don't pay that stamp duty, you cannot purchase that home. And that money goes directly into state government coffers. So why shouldn't money, which is collected by putting a tax on housing, be used to create a strong, viable public housing sector? If you used $6 billion per year for the public housing sector, you could spot purchase or build enough public housing units to house 100,000 people. That's right, 100,000 people with $6 billion. If you put $1 billion aside for ongoing costs and use $5 billion, you could have houses for 80 to 100,000 people. If you did this for a decade, almost 20% of the Victorian population would be in public housing. And the savings outweigh the cost of diverting $5 to $6 billion from the state budget from public housing into other areas of activity. It makes sense. A strong public housing sector means there are more decreased crime, decreased medical issues, better health care, less impact on the health system, less impact on the mental health system, and the list goes on and on. It is a win-win situation. But in 2021, we're told everything that is public is bad and everything that is private is good. Look at the Royal Commission into the private sector in the nursing home sector and see how miserable they failed. Look at the Royal Commission to the banking sector and see how they've failed miserably in terms of providing services to people. So, the ball's in your court. You can go to our Facebook pages, Public Housing Everybody's Business, or Defend and Extend Public Housing. You can join us for the vigils on the steps of the Victorian Parliament if you're in Victoria. And we have vigils on a Tuesday night and a Thursday. You need to look at the Facebook page or or contact us to find out the exact times. There is one evening, and the next day, the next week it'll be a midday. So it gives people who are working and people who are not working the ability to join the vigils. And more importantly, as we approach the next state election in Victoria, which will be the end November 2022, don't forget, we can apply pressure. We applied so much pressure with our 10-day protest on the steps of the Victorian Parliament House during the election campaign, and we applied so much pressure that the Labor state government promised to build 1,000 public housing units. How many have they built to date? None. They've continued privatising. They will continue to promise if they're put under pressure. So we need to increase that pressure to ensure that the public housing sector expands, not contracts, in 2021, where more and more people are suffering from housing insecurity. Whether you rent, whether you pay a mortgage, whether you're homeless, housing insecurity affects 70 to 80% of the population. If you lose your job, you can't pay your mortgage, you've got to sell your home. If you get sick, you may find in a situation where you can't pay your mortgage or your rent. And we're all in an area of insecurity as far as jobs are concerned and as far as health is concerned. It's something that can happen to anybody. And let's not forget, that although interest rates are historically low, that if they increase, which they will, from 2 to 3% to 10%, most Australians who have a mortgage will not be able to repay that mortgage, irrespective of how many people in that family work. So think about it. Think about public housing. It is a solution. We don't need a revolution. We don't need a rebellion. We just need to continue to place pressure on our elected representatives to change their policies. And that's why we form public interest before corporate interest. Not just to work in the community, not just to be involved in strikes and occupations, petitions, protest vigils, but also to be involved in the parliamentary elections in order to give these people a little bit of a fright, a little bit of push as far as public housing is concerned. So if you are interested in public housing, I encourage you to join public interest before corporate interests. We need 550 members before we can apply for registration as a federal political party and also as a state political party in Victoria. Currently we have 453 members. We need 97 more members. You can contact us via a variety of ways. You can download the application form by going to PIBCI.net. Have a look at the application form if you like it. Join us. If you haven't got a computer, don't despair. If you haven't got a printer, don't despair. You can always leave a message on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489, and we'll send you some application forms. The fact is, if you do nothing, nothing will change.